I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, the chaos that has erupted on the streets of Baltimore in the aftermath of the death of Freddie Gray, who was arrested by Baltimore police on the morning of April 12th, who wound up in a coma, and a week after his arrest, Freddie Gray was dead. Was Freddie Gray the victim of some kind of physical abuse by the Baltimore Police Department? Is this a case similar to the police shooting in North Charleston, where a police officer shot Walter Scott in the back as he ran away? On the streets of Baltimore, protesters believe the police are guilty of some kind of police brutality, and mobs of people have turned ugly and violent, causing Baltimore to call out the National Guard to restore order, imposing curfews in the city, even canceling an Orioles baseball game at Camden Yards, which generated a great deal of attention. On the other side, the Baltimore Police Department claims it did absolutely nothing to Freddie Gray, and that his death, however tragic, was not caused by anything the police may have done. The police report states that after Mr. Gray and another man started running away from police officers, Gray was apprehended without putting up any resistance, and that no force was used against him. According to the Baltimore police, Gray asked for an inhaler when he was first arrested, and he was put in a police van to take him to jail, and in the van, Gray seemed agitated. The van picked up another prisoner on the way, who was put in a separate compartment, separate from Gray. But Gray's behavior in the van caused the police to call for a medic. By the time the van reached its destination, Gray was unable to speak and was having trouble breathing. He then fell into a coma, and a week later, Freddie Gray was dead. According to police records, an autopsy was done on Freddie Gray's body, which showed no evidence of any force having been used against him. Baltimore Deputy Police Commissioner Jerry Rodriguez said, quote, "I know Mr. Gray suffered a very traumatic injury, but I don't know if it happened prior to him getting into the van or while he was in the van." And that's the crux of the problem. What did the Baltimore police do or not do? And might they be guilty of not doing enough to save Freddie Gray's life? This incident is seen by many as another in a series of police interactions with members of the African American community in which an African American has wound up dead. And again, it's caused the streets of Baltimore this past week to become the scene of violent demonstrations. Well, Baltimore is also the home to one of the most vibrant of all American Jewish communities. How has the Jewish community of Baltimore reacted to the death of Freddie Gray and the rioting in the streets? For some insight, I'm so very pleased to be joined by a very special friend, a longtime rabbi in Baltimore, who you may have seen many times here on JBS, Rabbi Mitchell Wohlberg, rabbi of an Orthodox synagogue in Baltimore that he served since 1978, Beth Tefiloh congregation. Mitchell, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Good to hear from you again, Mark.
Okay, Mitchell, you're in Baltimore. You're seeing events as they unfold firsthand. What's been the reaction of your congregation? What's your personal reaction?
It's very important, Mark, to understand when we say Baltimore, there's Baltimore City and there's also Baltimore County.
Yes.
Baltimore City is where the trouble is taking place. Baltimore County is where a large segment of the Jewish community lives. Baltimore County has not been affected in any which way by what's taking place in Baltimore City.
Got it.
There's always the fear, there's always the rumor that something might happen. But at the present time, everything here in Baltimore County, where a large segment of the Jewish community lives, is calm and peaceful and close to business as usual.
Mitchell,
Baltimore City is primarily a black city, and that is where the trouble is taking place.
The Jews of your community feel any connection to the African community of Baltimore County?
Of Baltimore County
City.
Or of Baltimore City?
Yep.
Not much. Being honest, not much. There is an interaction, Market. Baltimore City, we're going to say, is primarily black. Baltimore County, we're going to say, is primarily white. There is an area in between which is a mixed neighborhood. In that mixed neighborhood, there is a large segment of the Orthodox community. For the most part, there's a live and let live relationship in that community. But that is the community that I would say could feel most threatened by the events that are taking place, because it's taking place right next door to them.
Mm-hmm. Do you worry that any violence will come into Baltimore County?
No, not really. I'll give you an example. There was supposed to be a meeting of the Associated Federation here in Baltimore. It was supposed to take place at the Jewish Community Center in Park Heights Avenue. Park Heights Avenue is where most of the Orthodox community lives, and it is a very mixed neighborhood. They moved their meeting to my synagogue.
Interesting.
It's only a 5-10 minute ride, but it was felt that that's enough of a distance that nothing's going to happen here.
Mm-hmm.
Our school, our day school of close to 1,000 children, was open all day.
Mm-hmm. So, Mitchell, what you're saying is that the Jewish community in Baltimore County in no way identifies with Baltimore City, as if in some way whatever's going on in Baltimore City reflects upon the greater Baltimore area.
Let's put it like this. In Baltimore County, most of the synagogues are non-Orthodox. Those are the synagogues that have special services on Martin Luther King Day. It's the Orthodox synagogues that live next door to the black community.
And you don't have Martin Luther King Day?
In my synagogue, yes, but ours, as you know, is a modern Orthodox synagogue. For the most part, within the Orthodox community, the community that lives together with a black community, there is a live and let live, and let's leave it at that.
Okay. How about the larger issue that this particular incident taps into? To what extent are members of your congregation, and Mitchell, you are a very outspoken, socially aware rabbi. To what extent do you fear that there is a pattern here? In some way, there is a subtle police mentality that is disturbing to you as it relates to the African American community of America?
It's not subtle. And some of it is not disturbing. The reality is, let's remember, Mark, this is Maryland. This is not New York. This is close to the Mason-Dixon line. And there's no question that there's a disconnect between the predominantly white Baltimore City Police Department and the predominantly black community. But, you know, we can only speak in generalities. But if you really get down to it, there are cases of police brutality, and this case most probably was an example of that. The report is going to come out later in the week, but we already know that the black man involved was not given the medical attention he should have gotten immediately. When he was put into a van, he was not. They did not put him in with a seatbelt, which is supposed to be the rules. Something went wrong there. And something goes wrong on a regular basis between the police department and the black community. But most of the time, it doesn't. And that's true of what's going on with the rioting also. 85,000 basically black kids got out of school on Monday, and almost all of them went home. 300-400 of them stuck around and caused trouble. And it's important to recognize that there are divisions within the black community as there are within the white community as well.
Again,
but the Jewish community and the black community, with the exception of the Orthodox community, live in two different worlds, and there's no sense in kidding ourselves about that.
I'm sorry, say that again, Mitchell.
The Jewish community and the black community, with the exception of the Orthodox community and a specific area of town, live in two different worlds.
To what extent do you feel that the events that, it begins in some way in Ferguson, then it goes to Staten Island, then it goes to North Charleston, now it's come to Baltimore. And by the way, I feel very differently about Ferguson than I do about Staten Island and North Charleston. The whole hands up, don't shoot turned out not to be true. And I understand that people sometimes use events as symbols to rally a certain kind of support within their community. I try as hard as I can, Mitchell, to be as objective and honest as I can be. And here on JBS, we try to do that all the time with every issue that occurs, whether it's Israeli-Palestinian, whether it's the issue of Iran, whether it's the issue of police brutality vis-a-vis any community, especially the African-American community. There seems to be a real difference in nature between what happened to Michael Brown in Ferguson and what happened to Eric Garner in Staten Island or Walter Scott in North Charleston. But I'm asking you in general, as a rabbi who speaks out all the time, to what extent do you fear that America has either taken a step back in terms of race relations in this country? To what extent do you feel it is an issue that is in some way media manipulated and manipulated by those who are making much more of this than they should?
All right, let's start at the very beginning. As you know, Mark, I am no fan of Barack Obama. We have discussed in the past a sermon that I had delivered early on in this presidency, which questioned his relationship with the state of Israel. Having said that, you should know I came very close to voting for him for the one reason that he was an African American. And I thought having a president of the United States who was an African American would go miles and miles to solving the deep racial divide that takes place here in America. Unfortunately, it hasn't worked out that way. How much of that is his fault? Listen, that's not the subject at hand. But there is a racial divide, and everybody plays a role in having that divide take place. There's flaws in the black community. There was a very strong picture on television when the rioting was taking place of a black mother going into the center of the riots and pulling her kid away and pulling the kid back home. There aren't enough pictures of black men doing that. There's a serious flaw in the black community, and that can't be always blamed on we don't spend enough on education and on poverty and just the behavior of the people who rioted. This wasn't the protest. These are thugs. These are thieves. This had nothing to do with what had happened with Mr. Gray in a paddy wagon. This had to do with people who have nothing better to do than to riot and then to do drugs and to rob. This was poverty. If it was poverty, you would be robbing canned goods. You don't take televisions if it's poverty. The black community is heartbroken over what has happened. The thugs burnt down their own community. That's all it really is. They burnt down a drugstore, one of the only drugstores in that area, and that drugstore is not going to rebuild. They'd have to be crazy to do that. And who's going to suffer for that? Having said that, the white media also has to take a certain responsibility. Mark, you saw the picture of the fire that was burning in Baltimore.
Yes.
That was burning in one street. And there were a few other arsons But Baltimore wasn't burning. It's no different than when there's a rocket attack on the Golan Heights. Jerusalem isn't burning. And the media does tend to blow these things out of proportion. And I'll have to say something else. The media provides the black community with poor role models to emulate. Time magazine last week had the 100 most important people. And you know who is number one, who is on their cover? Kanye West. That is the best black role model you can come up with. And now the good news, all is going to be saved because Reverend Al Sharpton is coming to town. Who made him into a spokesman for the black community? The white media. So we're paying a bit of a price for our behavior as well.
Mitchell, I always love talking to you. I have to get you back up here into the studio. You always bring insight, and I want to share it with our audience. I thank you so much for giving me a moment today on JBS.
Thanks a lot, and you take care.
Thank you, my friend. The thoughts of Mitchell Wohlberg, Rabbi of Beth Tefiloh congregation in Baltimore, Maryland. As you hear, he's in Baltimore County as opposed to Baltimore City. On our phones now from Baltimore is the head of the Baltimore Board of Rabbis, Rabbi Chaim Landau, who's also Rabbi Emeritus of Orthodox Congregation Ner Tamid in Baltimore. Chaim, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
So I want to begin the same way, Chaim. To what extent have whatever events have taken place in Baltimore City, and Mitchell helped us understand the difference between Baltimore City and Baltimore County, but as you look at all the events that have taken place in the city, as a Jew, as the head of the Board of Rabbis, what's your sense, what's your reaction, and what do you hear from your colleagues who are part of the Board of Rabbis of Baltimore?
Well, I think many of my thoughts and those of my colleagues have been eloquently expressed already by Rabbi Wohlberg. What I would like to add to what you have already heard is the one word that has been stated time and time again as a means for attempting to understand this anger.
Yes.
And the word is frustration. The frustration. It's cause and effect. It's meant for us to be able to understand the cause of the anger and the resultant effects of their reactions. So it seems that we're all left to assume that when you're part of a community who's frustrated about the way you're treated, you can explain away with some modicum of self-justification any kind of behavior which gives vent to this frustration. And this allows for us to understand how a certain section of society justifies a blatant breach to the fabric of the society, which depends on an understanding of the rule of law and the observance of local laws and statutes. So what I think we have to understand in looking at the attempts of justification for what happened is the fact that the certain parts of the black community are not the only people in America who are frustrated.
Yes.
There are Latinos who work for a pittance doing the jobs Americans would never demean themselves to do, and yet have to watch as they are demonized for threatening American jobs, milking the system, and for polluting the ethnic character of America. And through it all, they have never destroyed an American city, caused loss of life, businesses, or threatened American citizens. And we shouldn't forget that given the number of Latinos and the way they are propagating in America today, the black community will find themselves at the bottom of the totem pole, being left behind, while this Latino community are picking themselves up by their shoestrings, not only to improve their own lives, but those of future generations. And that's just one group in America. There are the Muslims, ever increasing and growing larger, who are frustrated about racial profiling that they have to be put through and the ever-increasing suspicions they come under as a result of terrorist murders and crimes performed by their fundamentalist brothers and sisters. And then there's the American middle class, who are also frustrated by an economy that's left them standing alone as the American dream of owning their own home and retiring with confidence continues to slip away.
Okay. Chaim, forgive me for interrupting you because I'm not sure that I am following your train of thought. I have a specific problem to address here. The problem is there are riots in Baltimore after the African American communities, at least some in the African American community, really feel there is a, if not a concerted, a subtle but very real police mentality that targets African Americans. My reason for wanting to talk to you as the head of the Board of Rabbis is twofold. I first wanted to know whether you felt the Jews of Baltimore, and again, we now understand this Baltimore County, Baltimore City, but it's all Baltimore. Do the Jews of Baltimore in any way feel a part of this problem? Or do they see it as, it's over in the city, it has nothing to do with us? And to what extent do you, the colleagues whom you work with all the time, would they say that Baltimore now is a symptom of some larger problem, specifically between police and African Americans? Or do you and your colleagues say the Freddie Gray incident, as tragic as it may be, is an isolated incident and should not be seen as part of a larger pattern that begins with Ferguson, whether you agree with Ferguson or not, and goes to Staten Island and then goes to North Charleston and now has come to Baltimore?
That's a loaded question. It seems like a statement and a question, but I think that from what I hear, the answer is that there were two protests, Mark. There was the protest of good people who wanted to reflect their anger and their sense of frustration at a catastrophic death of a young man in the hands of the police. And then there were the riots. The riots were not caused by Freddie Gray's death. Mm-hmm. They were caused by people who wanted to cause mayhem and destruction. With them, there is no kind of sympathy or affiliation. These were criminal elements who took advantage of the peaceful protesters and used the peaceful protests to loot, rob, and destroy. This has nothing to do with Freddie Gray.
I understand.
What does have to do with Freddie Gray is that he is not the first, nor will he be the last black person to die in police custody, and that there is a sympathetic connection between all kinds of people, that the police have not been consistent in the use of force for people who threaten life and property. And as a result of this, we need to create a sensitivity to all races who are, in the eyes of the police, a threat to law and order. This goes for everyone. You don't have to be black or white, Jewish or non-Jewish. Every citizen of the United States deserves the same kind of treatment, given the threat that the police see any individual to the rest of society.
And I just want to push you one more moment. Chaim, bottom line for you. Are you concerned there is some kind of concerted, purposeful discrimination within the American police mentality, reflected now in the Baltimore Police Department, directed specifically at African Americans? That's not a loaded question, by the way. You can say yes or no to that, Chaim.
No, you can't, because the question makes a wrong assumption.
What's the wrong assumption?
Because the reality is the police department in Baltimore City is headed by a black man. It is predominantly black and not white. And what one has to understand is that whether you are black or white within the police department, you respond to a threat according to a level of training with which the rest of the public has a certain level of understanding that has to be used. But it has to be used consistently. So I'm not going to say that the police department is racist, given the number of black policemen who are already part of that police force. But I must say that the number of black individuals who have suffered most recently within the police system of arrest and imprisonment has left a question mark as to how well the focus of a threat is being responded to with an undisciplined sense of force.
Chaim, I appreciate your taking time and trying to clarify it from your perspective. Very, very helpful. I wish you kol tuv v'hatzlacha. I hope to speak to you many times in the future.
Thank you very much. Good luck.
Be well. The thoughts of Chaim Landau, head of the Board of Rabbis of Baltimore. So what's your view of the death of Freddie Gray? How concerned are you that there is a mentality within the American Police Department today that's either targeting African Americans or simply permitting racist attitudes to influence inappropriate behavior against African Americans? Or are these cases tragic but isolated instances which do not represent a pattern of police behavior and which are exaggerated by media exploitation? I'd love to know your thoughts, and I'm sure you join with me in expressing our profound condolences to any family that loses a loved one, especially unnecessarily at the hands of the police force in any situation. Please share your thoughts with me. Email me, write me, post on our Facebook wall, or tweet me. I look forward to hearing from you very soon. My thanks as always to our director, Sloan Copeland, production coordinator, Serge Goldberg, JBS Associate Director, Dara Golub, and the producer for this segment of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.